Now, before we move on, can I take a moment and add one last wrinkle to make it more applicable to us? And I want us all to ponder that initial question. What do we imagine against the Lord? Or what do we imagine about the Lord? What kind of a God do we think he is? Now, through much of Protestant history, especially through Calvinism, when John Calvin split off his group in the Protestant Reformation, he tried more than anything to guard the sovereignty of God, which is a good thing. But he did it to such an extent that he turned God into an unapproachable deity that people tended to obey out of fear rather than follow out of love. It's that mentality that brings on sinners in the hands of an angry God, that famous sermon from Jonathan Edwards. That God looks at you like a spider that he's dangling over the pit of hell. He looks at you with disgust and loathing. Is that what you're imagining God to be? Are you imagining him to be all vengeance and fury and wrath, like we saw in a previous verse? And have you lost sight of his goodness? Have you lost sight of the fact that he is slow to anger? Because many a Calvinist did. Now, as contraries go, usually when a culture for a time is at one extreme, then eventually a new generation will come that is countercultural and tries to correct that imbalance, unfortunately, usually by overcorrecting it. And while when one generation erred on the side of God is too just, subsequent generations tend to err on the side of God being too merciful. And that does seem to describe the way we imagine things about God in our day. And we have turned him into a pushover. We have said that he's so slow to anger that he never gets angry at all. And that's not the case. If in the old days, justice robbed mercy, in our day, mercy robs justice. And those are false imaginings either way. In fact, if I could add one thing to your vocabulary, this is a fascinating thing that several Protestant researchers have figured out. That what is going wrong with religion in our day? Why are people leaving it or not fully living into it? They've come up with what they call a parasitic faith. It's almost this cancer that's working its way into denominations across the board. And doesn't become its own denomination. It just it parasitically attaches itself to other churches' beliefs and starts to suck out the spiritual strength from within. Sound intriguing? Sound concerning? Because guess what? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not immune to this parasitic faith either. They call it moralistic, therapeutic deism, which admittedly doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. I mean, no wonder they don't have the moralistic, therapeutic, deistic first ward or as its own denomination. No, instead it's much more insidious because it takes God for who he is and then imagines things about him that destroy the whole idea of who our Father in heaven really is. I'll give you some examples. The moralistic side would say, well, as people of faith, we're supposed to be moralistic, which isn't even quite moral, but close. It's watered down a belief in holiness and self-sacrifice and repentance, self-discipline, self-denial. Instead, let's just boil it down to an easy, lowest common denominator, and let's be moralistic in terms of let's be nice to people. Now, it's important to be nice to people, don't get me wrong. But this is a niceness that prioritizes do no harm in terms of, well, how are people going to feel about themselves? Let's just you do you. That's the clarion call of moralism instead of true morality. You see, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make anybody feel bad. And so if I just have love, and again, remember last week, that's one of the ideographs in our day that's untouchable. Moralistic therapeutic deism trades on love with no limits. Love divorced from law. It's all about the second great commandment without much concern for the first great commandment. You see how it would be so parasitic? How it can attach itself in religions because it sounds pretty good to start. Just make sure everyone feels good and they're accepted exactly as they are. It's the come as you are, which is true, but you can also leave as you were, which is not how God approaches things. There's the moralistic. The therapeutic is along those same lines. The greatest goal is that we all feel comfortable in our own skin and aren't asked to change, because sometimes those can be hard sayings. Who can hear them? I mean, the wicked take the truth to be hard, so let's avoid those hard truths. And let's just tell people what they want to hear. Let's scratch the itching ear. Let's do what the priest of Noah did to the people of King Noah, of just, hey, there's no law, so there's no sin, so there's no reason to feel guilt. How's that for good therapy? Therapeutic? You understand why they use that term? It's less about prophets crying repentance and more about therapists making sure people feel very comfortable in their circumstances. And I'm not saying anything negative against therapists. Please don't get me wrong, okay? But when religion has become that, and there is no set standard, there's no ultimate truth or divinely designed right and wrong, then that's all we're left with is therapeuticism. And then the deism, that's an interesting view because it still acknowledges God, but the God of deism, that was the God of Thomas Paine, is distant, unless you need him to come through in the clutch at some moment. But for the most part, you kind of just do it on your own, because if God were present in our lives, he'd probably be telling us what to do, and that's not good therapy. He'd ask us to be holy and not just nice, and I'd rather just be content with my moralism. You see where these scholars are coming from? I was blown away by this insight and frankly concerned that I see its presence in my own faith. Culturally, that is. And to me, that question is something I want to linger in our minds a little more often than it does. What do we imagine against the Lord? And is the Lord trying to break through those imaginings and reintroduce himself as a Lord of love? Yes, but also a Lord of law. As a God who, yes, is slow to anger, but also has commandments he expects us to live. This is who we worship. This is how we worship him. This is life eternal, that we might know God and Jesus Christ and know them for who they really are. No imaginings at all. A God of great expectations. A God of covenant and jealous to keep us in it for our sake. Maybe we could chew on that a little longer.